So, from the mid-1500s to the late 1600s, European explorers crossed every vast expanse of mountain ranges, valleys, and dense jungles across the entire continent of South America. Searching for lost cities of gold like El Dorado, toppling civilizations like the Inca, burning down villages, towns, and cities across the Amazon River, they melted down every piece of gold or golden artifact they could get their hands on and sent shiploads of treasure worth billions of dollars today across the Atlantic and back to Spain. And whether through torture or genuine curiosity, the Spanish attempted to pull as much information as they could about these wild and mysterious lands from the native people. But one thing those early explorers never realized was the sheer scale of South America's civilization. The Inca Empire alone, which covered around 10% of South America, contained somewhere between 20 to 30 million people. The Amazon, potentially another 10 to 20 million. Not only this, but the Spanish had no idea how far back and deep into time South American history really went. The Inca were standing upon the shoulder of the great Andean civilizations before them that stretched back thousands and thousands of years. The Amazonians were the descendants of the people who'd invented the black terra preta soils that cultivated massive gardens deep in the Amazon some 8,000 to 10,000 years ago. And eventually, at least in my opinion, these cultures that developed in the Amazon later influenced the Andean cultures as well, and I think this is where we start to get these WereJaguar gods coming in. Different and independent civilizations rose and fell across each corner of the entire continent for at least 5,000 years. But almost certainly this ancient history goes much deeper than that. And for the last 500 years that Europeans have been exploring and uncovering the ancient worlds of South America, we still aren't even close to fully understanding everything that's been lost to time and war. And much like the great lost city of Machu Picchu, there was another massive city built on a jungle-covered mountain ridge hidden deep in the jungles of Colombia that Spanish explorers also never found. The Lost City of Teyuna, a massive ancient complex built high in the mountains of northern Colombia. The origins of this massive citadel in the clouds are thought to date back nearly 1,000 years before the height of the Inca Empire, and it was a place reserved for the shamans and timekeepers who knew how to read and interpret the secrets in the sky, as well as royalty and other important figures of the city's culture known as the Tairona. And one of the most interesting things about the Tairona civilization is that, like the Olmecs and the Maya in Mesoamerica, as well as many of the other overlooked civilizations of Central America and many of the Andean and Amazonian civilizations in South America, the Tairona also have or acknowledged the WereJaguar, a race or population of shape-shifting human jaguars. Only 30 to 40% of the jungle's area has been explored, but with the help of LiDAR, archaeologists are finding more and more of these lost sites. My name's Luke, I'm an American explorer and an anthropologist, and I come from a lineage of explorers who searched the American Southwest for lost Spanish treasure and ancient artifacts dating back to the 1890s. And this is American Wilds. In 1972, deep in the dense green forests of Colombia's Sierra Nevada region, a local family named the Sepulvedas was out hunting game in one of the valleys when they shot a band-tailed guan. When they tracked down the fallen bird, they found that it had landed on an ancient stone staircase, partially overgrown in the mountainside. They climbed the hundreds of half-buried stone steps in front of them until they finally reached the very top of the mountain, where a massive platform citadel was sitting quietly and undisturbed at the top of the ridge. They didn't know when, but clearly some great ancient civilization long ago had flattened and shaved off the top of this ridge to create one of the most unique and beautiful ancient sites found anywhere in the Americas. So if you've been watching my channel for a while, you know that I appreciate craftsmanship, whether that's an ancient temple that's been standing for centuries or thousands of years, or even sometimes I like a nice piece of furniture with a lot of history behind it. And that's why I'm excited to partner with Flexispot to set up this Kana Japanese joinery bed. For me, by far the best part about this bed is the design. It's inspired by traditional Japanese woodworking techniques. The Kana bed features clean lines, beautiful natural wood tones, and a sturdy construction that feels incredibly solid. I actually hate building furniture with tons of cheap screws and cheap material. It just feels overly complicated and like a waste of my money. But with the Kana Japanese joinery bed, the experience is exactly the opposite of that. This actually feels like it's worth the money. Every piece fits together with precision, giving it a premium handcrafted feel that's usually reserved for much more expensive furniture. What also impressed me is how sturdy and quiet it is. There's no wobbling or creaking while you're sleeping on it. And the natural wood finish adds so much warmth to the room instead of feeling like just another piece of furniture. It actually feels like a thoughtfully designed part of our space. And the low profile design creates a modern minimalist aesthetic while still feeling cozy and inviting. The simple, timeless design works beautifully with almost any decor style, making the entire bedroom feel a lot more open, calm, and intentional. It's the kind of bed design that easily becomes the centerpiece of the room without overwhelming the space. So if you're looking for something that's beautifully well designed and very well built, then check out Flexispot's Japanese Kana joinery bed. It's probably the nicest bed frame that I've ever had and 100% the easiest to assemble. Click the link below to experience the Flexispot bed frame for yourself. Don't miss out. Use our exclusive code JPBF in all caps for an instant discount. Click the link in the description below, and thank you so much to Flexispot for sponsoring this video. Get a Japanese joinery bed from Flexispot and never build a cheap bed made out of cheap screws and materials ever again. Let's get back to the show. The family began regularly returning to the site, exploring its ruins and looking for any ancient artifacts they could find, looting the royal tombs throughout the citadel. Over time, word of the site began to spread and other looters would arrive to see the city for themselves. After a feud over the discovered ruins, a son of the Sepulvedas was shot several times in the chest, ultimately leading to the intervention of the Colombian authorities, who then took control of the archaeological site. And by 1976, archaeologists began clearing away the jungle from the lost city and excavating its ruins. Like Machu Picchu, the local indigenous tribes, who usually stick to their own micro-regions and barely have their voice heard, have come out to say that they'd always known of the city of Teyuna and its ruins, as well as the many other ancient sites in the jungle, and they would visit these ruins regularly, but they never looted them and always kept their location a secret, which is actually 100% believable. I cannot think of a single example that I've ever seen of an ancient tomb that was looted in ancient times. Like you can see all throughout ancient Egypt, we see ancient Egyptians looting the tombs of other ancient Egyptians, but nowhere in the Americas have I ever seen anything like this. And in fact, I've actually seen the opposite, where you see one culture discovering a city of another lost ancient culture, finding the tombs, opening them up, and not taking anything out of the tombs, but instead burying themselves with all of their treasures inside the tombs of these lost people. So this is exactly the opposite of tomb raiding. And I think that this is something that was pretty prevalent throughout all of the Americas. They just would not desecrate the tombs of their ancestors. So you can imagine the descendants of the Tairona living at the bases of these mountains hundreds of years later and wanting themselves to one day be buried among the tombs of their long-distant ancestors up in the mountainsides. And it's these descendants who gave the city the name Teyuna. The initial work on the site was primarily clearing out the jungle and mapping the ruins, trying to fully understand the size and scale of the site. They found giant circular platforms, enormous sprawling staircases, sophisticated drainage canals that allowed the water to flow away from the core of the citadel, and over 160 stone terraces surrounding the site, almost exactly like what you see scattered throughout Peru and especially at Machu Picchu. Millions of tons of earth had to be moved to create this site, and millions of tons of large stone slabs had to be quarried, cut, and transported up the steep mountainsides to serve as the staircases leading to the city. The pavement that lined the paths between the paved circular platforms, the retaining walls, terraces, tombs, and aqueducts, making up over 200 known stone structures, with many more structures made of wood and earth, not to mention the peripheral parts of the city that extend all the way down into the valley from the top of the ridge. And many people found this site to be so similar to Machu Picchu that they thought it must have been constructed within the same time period, and maybe even by the Inca themselves. Eventually though, carbon-14 dating was deployed at the site, and when the results came back, it shocked both the locals and the archaeologists. Teyuna was nearly 1,000 years older than the suspected dating of Machu Picchu and the Inca Empire, with the earliest soil samples dating back sometime around 500 AD. Archaeologists found some of the finest goldsmithing work ever discovered in South America. When the Spaniards were searching for cities of gold, a place like Teyuna is exactly what they were looking for. The Tairona crafted some of the most intricate pieces of gold jewelry and artwork, not just in the Americas, but in the entire ancient world. If you've ever gotten a chance to see their golden artifacts in person, the level of precision required to create such detailed statues at such a tiny size is actually mind-blowing. They also found larger golden pendants that depict what were interpreted as the ruling shamanic class acting as shapeshifters, taking on the appearance of, you guessed it, jaguars, as well as other species to tap into the supernatural powers and expand their perception of the natural world. So if you've seen me in other videos or you've ever listened to a podcast appearance of mine, you've probably heard me talk about this Pan-American jaguar cult. Officially, we know that ancient cultures deified or revered the jaguar and even had shamans that could quote-unquote turn into jaguars, take upon the essence of the jaguar, go into a hallucinogenic state, and wake up looking through the eyes of a jaguar, which this phenomenon in particular is actually still recorded by modern day people when they go down to South America and take part in ayahuasca ceremonies. And across large portions of South America, it seems as though certain ancient cults worshipped a god called the staff god or the fang deity, who is also a human jaguar hybrid that we call a WereJaguar. And I happen to believe that you can actually find the remnants of this Pan-American jaguar cult from the southern Amazon and southern Peru down into Chile all the way up to the American Southeast, with mythological creatures like the Mississippian underwater panther, which I'm convinced at one point, at least in part, must have been a jaguar, because jaguars are the only large cat in the Americas which is found on land as much as it is in the water. Or even the Cherokee legends in Appalachia, where hunters would meet and speak with panthers and be lured back to the panther's home, only to fall in a deep trance and emerge days or weeks later thinking only a few hours had gone by, and who are now unable to live like a normal person because they'd taken upon the nature of the panther and so on. This jaguar culture, along with the cultivation of maize or corn, is one of the most single widespread cultural aspects that we see of the ancient American world. It's literally everywhere, and it's one of the least talked about or studied subject across the Americas. Archaeologists also found hordes of elegant painted ceramics left behind, and one of the strangest things that they found is called the mapstone, a huge stone slab with seemingly random or erratic lines and angles carved into it. Archaeologists have been studying it for years, and they believe it to be a map of the greater Sierra Nevada mountain range, which connects Teyuna to many other ancient sites. That said, this would be one of the only examples of Native Americans creating a physical 2D bird's eye view of their immediate area that has ever been discovered. The only other example that comes to mind might be Juticula Rock, which is just a few hours drive away from me. Or maybe even the Nazca Lines, where ancient people are conceptualizing something that's 3D on a 2D scale from a bird's eye view. If you can think of any other examples, let me know in the comment section below. At no point during the height of Teyuna would a visitor or resident of the city be walking through mud or on the ground. It was a sign of complete and utter power to be able to conquer the natural world and build an entire city that's elevated off the jungle floor, away from snakes, spiders, and mud. Visitors from nearby cities were meant to be impressed, ascending the 1,200-step staircase and finally reaching a citadel that's set high up in the clouds with enormous houses inhabited by people who were wearing only the finest gold jewelry and garments anyone in the region had ever seen. The Tairona goldsmithing was so heavily sought after that we can even find their goldwork adorned upon kings buried in Central America who were clearly aware of this great city and paid handsomely through trade to receive gifts of golden treasures. In fact, these golden artifacts were so heavily sought after and prized that you can even find artifacts that look suspiciously similar along the coast of the southeast United States. This artifact from Florida has no officially known origin, and I think it's very likely that it was brought up from South America by merchants at some point in ancient times. From the stories we hear from the descendants of the Tairona, the high priests who ruled over the city were the voices of the cosmos, the interpreters of the signs and patterns in the sky. The first European explorers to sight Colombia's Caribbean coast were in 1499. A crew led by Alonso de Ojeda charted the coast and witnessed the tall cliff faces and enormous mountains rising up out of the water with snow-capped mountains far off in the distance. A year later, in 1500, a second Spanish ship led by Juan de la Cosa would be the first to make landfall. It was a quick stop to make ship repairs and gather resources before heading off again. But they did encounter the natives and noted that, unlike many other obscure tribes they'd seen in their journeys who, as they said, lived naked like savages, these Tairona people were clearly a much more wealthy and established and substantial group of people. They painted their bodies, wore elegant clothing made of cloth, and were all adorned with gold and green stone jewelry. In 1501, Rodrigo de Bastidas, a wealthy businessman turned explorer, which was exceptionally rare for explorers of this time, led an expedition back into this region. He discovered the mouth of the Magdalena River, which leads to the heart of Colombia and eventually down into the Amazon. He was unique for Spanish explorers in that he treated the natives with decency and respect. He traded with them and mapped the coastline of their region. But he eventually left the region to continue to Panama, but made note that this region of the Tairona people was filled with thick-bodied, healthy natives who were all well-dressed, well-groomed, and clearly materially wealthy, and that there must be more to this realm hidden somewhere deeper in the Colombian interior. But unfortunately, the relationship between the Spaniards and the Tairona quickly soured. Between 1505 to 1524, when Spanish ships began continuously returning to the region, filled with soldiers and navigators, using the natives' generosity to explore deeper and deeper into the interior of the Tairona's territory, the Spanish compared these lands to the paradise-like region of Tuscany on the Italian coast. Huge, perfectly cultivated agricultural fields, spacious homes, a well-organized society with healthy, thick, well-dressed bodies, and men who stood as tall as the Spaniards. They had sections of their territory dedicated to farming, others to hunting, and others to fishing. This was, by all accounts, a full-blown civilization. But little did the Spanish realize it was only the periphery of the greater Tairona civilization, which was actually ruled and commanded from the hidden and protected mountaintop citadels deep into the jungle. When the Spaniards began attempting to capture children and take women with them as slaves and informants, they were introduced to something that few Spaniards had actually seen in the New World: a standing army. From elsewhere in the interior of the Tairona territory, an organized army using a combination of overwhelming barrages of poison-tipped arrows and literal booby traps, from luring the Spaniards into steep and narrow valleys to hurl avalanches of stones, wooden logs, and poison arrows on top of them, the Tairona achieved one of the most staggering victories over the Spanish in the history of the contact period. Neither the Aztecs nor the Inca put up a defense as ferocious and effective as the Tairona. Tairona civilization was already over 1,000 years older than the Aztecs and the Inca by this point, and supported the lives of likely well over 250,000 people who lived in villages, towns, cities, and citadels across their territory, all connected by stone-paved roads and mountain trails. This was an entire civilization that should be mentioned alongside the Aztecs and the Inca, but the very reason they're so unknown today is because their defense against colonization was so successful. For the next 100 years between 1525 and the 1620s, the Tairona would continuously repel attempted Spanish invasions of their region's interior. And eventually, with no answer as to how to overcome the Tairona defense, the Spanish launched a scorched earth campaign in the year 1600. They laid waste to all of the native agricultural fields and villages along the coast and the river valleys just inland, burning the maize crops and cutting off their supply lines and trade routes with neighboring native regions. By this time as well, the Tairona, who'd been living in villages that were in close proximity to the Spaniards, were beginning to develop smallpox and other diseases, and with their agricultural homes now being torched, they were forced to take refuge deeper into the mountains and jungles among the other Tairona. Over the next decades, further Spaniard attempts to explore and raid the interior were repelled until the Tairona disappeared. And the Spanish, with no natives left to guide them through the dense terrain and teach them the way of the land, had no ability or manpower to penetrate the jungle-covered mountains on their own. And so, over the next several centuries, the Spanish town on the Tairona coast known as Santa Marta grew into a major city. But the Tairona's mountaintop citadel of Teyuna became reclaimed by the jungle, swallowed by the vines and earth, and for the most part, set in silence among the birds and snakes for nearly 400 years until it was rediscovered in 1972. The very reason that the Tairona are not hailed as one of the great predominant civilizations of the Americas is because their defense of the territory was so successful that the Spanish gave up and never found it. My name's Luke. Like and subscribe for more history from the American wilds, and I'll see you next time.